Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode in our magnificent series on Azure. This evening, I am very excited to have Mike Nelson with us, and as a co-host, the lovely and talented Ken Nalbone. Ken?
Good evening, everyone.
Sorry, I didn't give him the heads up that I was going to say lovely and talented.
Yeah.
Before we get into
Neither of which are true, by the way.
Lies, Ken. A couple of quick notes before we get started, before Mike just hangs up on us and says, screw these people.
Yeah.
A couple of quick notes. Please get in on the conversation. We will be watching the @vBrownBag and #vBrownBag Twitter feeds online, as well as listening to the question and chat boxes within the live feed from our live studio audience. Once again, our guest tonight is Mike Nelson. He is @NellMedia. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Williams. I'm @Mistwire. Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Ken Nalbone, and I am on Twitter as @KenNalbone.
Awesome, cool. So without further ado, let us give Mr. Nelson the keys to the kingdom. And here you go, sir. No, don't kick him off. Make him presenter. There we go.
Awesome. Let me switch over to that one, and let me see if you can you see that?
We can see your screen, sir. Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
Tweakers. Oh, that's a great URL.
Yeah, it was awesome. I picked that up like 4 or 5 years ago when I was working for a cloud provider, and my boss picked up Cloud Tweakers. So he came down and he was like, he did Cloud Tweakers, and I said, oh, I got to do Geek Tweakers, and it was just Tweakers after that. But yeah, so thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I know that this was kind of a last minute thing. So if any folks, were kind of, depressed because they thought that, Mike Nelson's coming on, I don't want to listen to vBrownBag tonight. I'm gonna have a rocking show for you. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about Azure troubleshooting. And I know in the series you've gone through VMs, you've gone through network, and you've gone through storage. Is that right? That's pretty much the gist of what you've done so far?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a little bit of troubleshooting. I'm not going to get into application, troubleshooting. I can show that to you, but I'm not a developer. I couldn't, code my way out of a wet paper bag, but I could script my way out of it, but I couldn't code out of it. So I'm not big on development. I'm not, I'm into containers and stuff like that, but not DevOps. So we're going to focus mainly on infrastructure. We're going to focus on the, again, the storage, the networking, the VMs, and even touch, maybe Azure Active Directory, stuff like that. Okay, so as you can see, I'm actually a TME for Rubrik. I work with Chris Wall and Andrew Miller and Rebecca Fitzhugh and a whole bunch of other really talented people over at Rubrik. I just got on with them. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Cloud Data Center Management, an Azure Advisor, a Citrix CTP, and a VMware vExpert. So that's me in a nutshell. What we're going to talk about is troubleshooting Azure. Now, the big thing about when I open up talks about this is around, the administrator, the IT generalist, if you will. Now, what we've lived with for years and years is we've lived with having, being able to walk up to a server and physically touch a server. And when we have a network problem, or we have a disk problem, or we have anything else that could go wrong with the core 4 inside of a box, we're able to walk up to that box, we're able to pull the cover off, we're able to replug wires in, we're able to swap cables, so on and so forth, when we need to troubleshoot something with that machine, okay? We can't do that anymore with the cloud. You can't go up and touch it. You can't walk into a data center and carry a cable in and say, hey, can you plug this cable into that server that my VM is running on out of the other 400,000 VMs that are running inside of this data center. You can't do that anymore. So you really have to think about troubleshooting in a different perspective. And I think of it as actually thinking about troubleshooting on a different plane, if you will, because you have to take it from a virtual perspective and understand what tools you can use, even though you can't physically see or touch what you're actually trying to troubleshoot. Now, some will say, well, when you're troubleshooting the network, you can't see or touch it. Well, kind of, because I know a lot of network guys that unless they can plug in a serial cable to a router or a switch, they're not happy. They're like, I got to have my serial connection. I got to have, I mean, that they were born and raised that way. And maybe it's because we're a little bit older. Yeah, I'm old, but the younger folks that are coming out of college, they're raised on cloud. They're raised on this stuff, so they have an immediate understanding of it. They don't know of the pain and trials and tribulations that we've gone through in the past. So you have to think about it on a different plane. And as the slide I'm showing, I'm just trying to give it an example, is you never really know what door to open. You have no clue when you start there, and if you've never worked in the cloud, is how to troubleshoot things in the cloud. And I'm going to try and help you out there. I'm going to try and see if I can give you some avenues into how to do that in Azure. So Azure is made up of this huge amount of services. You guys have probably seen this slide. It's a Microsoft slide. Actually, this is only a quarter of what Azure services, Azure gives you as a service. Okay, their infrastructure as a service, their platform as a service. Okay, everything that they have there, the software as a service, everything that they have. Okay, you can drill down on every one of these and still pull up maybe a half a dozen to a dozen more services that they give you. Okay, so it's massive. It may not even be what your data center looks like. Your data center may consist of 3 or 4 VMware hosts, that are running 30 or 40 VMs. But then you may be working for a large enterprise or something like that is running thousands of VMs. It has to be put into perspective. And when you're talking about Azure, there's also something about who's responsible for what. All right. So when you go to a cloud provider, now this isn't just Microsoft. This is Amazon. This is Google. Any of the hybrid cloud providers, Rackspace, whoever, they have what they call their area of responsibility. And when you're looking at on-premises, obviously you manage everything that's on-premises. But if you look at infrastructure as a service, you only manage a portion of it. The other half is managed by the cloud provider. As you get the platform as a service, it's even less. Software as a service, you have no management whatsoever, okay, into any of those categories. So when you have no management, but you also have no ability to really troubleshoot. Okay, so as you go up the stack, it gets a little different, and you have to adjust the way you troubleshoot. Now, one of the biggest things I'm going to push here, and just so everybody knows, I've only got like 5 or 6 slides. We're almost done here. Everything else is going to be demo. But what I want to push now is the thought to you that you have to be extremely careful. And I say this on every single presentation I give about Azure, because I will tell you the #1 question and the #1 complaint that I get from customers and clients and folks out in the field and people who are just starting out in Azure is consumption. Okay, so they will totally freak out. They'll be like, hey, I signed up for Azure, I got all this stuff running, I had the free tier, and then they shut everything down. They suspended it. Well, yeah, because you hit your consumption limit, right? Or I had a insurance provider who, 20 some $1,000 in credits that they get with their EA agreement. All of a sudden, a couple SQL DBAs get in there. Some of the operations folks start throwing stuff up there. Some of the development folks start throwing stuff up there. And all of a sudden they start getting these bills, and they're like, why am I getting these bills when I have all these credits? Well, because you've already consumed all of your credits. And there are certain services inside of any cloud provider, notwithstanding Azure, that consume more credits than others. And I will tell you that storage is a big one. Okay, egress of network is a big one, and then obviously the VM VM actual consumption of CPU RAM, and then you get into platform services like managed services like SQL and stuff like that. So you have to be concerned about consumption. You also have to be concerned about limits, and I'm going to go show that in the actual demo that I do, because every subscription that you get into Azure has a limit. Okay, you can only do certain things inside of a subscription. If you get the free tier, it's even more limited than an actual paid tier. All right, so when you go into a paid tier, you know, you're only allowed 20 CPUs inside of one sub, your virtual CPUs. And I don't know if many folks knew that. They're thinking, well, hell, I can take my entire infrastructure of my financial application, which is like 30 boxes, okay, at 4 procs each, and be able to throw that up into a sub, no problem. No, okay, you can't do that. So you have to be careful. And when you do, if you do something like that, you have to understand that it even gets more cloudy on how to troubleshoot. All right, so the one question I have for the two guys that, you know, for Ken and Chris is, in the consumption and limits picture you're looking at right now, what is this picture from? What movie is this picture from?
That would be National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation when he lights up the Christmas lights, of course.
Yes, it would. You are the first person that's gotten that. I am totally impressed. I'm totally impressed. Yes.
I know me some Christmas Vacation, yes.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So one thing I will point out, and this is the next thing on the slide, is in order to combat the consumption a little bit, you can do something called the ARO toolkit. So if you ever want to, you know, take a look at actually what you're consuming, it's the, you know, Azure Resource Optimization Toolkit, they call it, the ARO. And I encourage everyone to use that toolkit from Microsoft, because it can actually, you know, trim down what you're actually consuming if you're not using it. Okay, so like, you know, VMs that are kind of like VRO, right? So it can tell you what are stale VMs and unused resources and things like that. Cool. Now, the one thing I do want to tell you is that in this picture, a single pane of glass monitoring is a myth. I don't care what anybody says. So far, there's no way you could create a single pane of glass that anyone could even comprehend. Everything that you wanted to monitor, everything that you wanted to alert on, it's just not possible. Okay. If anybody can show me that it is possible, I'll show you a room like this, or even more, you know, because it's a pipe dream. It really is. It's something. It's utopia. And if you're talking about just monitoring a single application, sure. But if you want to monitor an entire infrastructure, if you want to be able to troubleshoot when all of a sudden everything on these screens turns red or turns yellow, okay, you need a way to visualize all that.
That is literally my dream man cave right there, by the way. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know why they use all these little monitors. I would probably just get one big wraparound one that's like 80 inches or something, you know.
And a couple for the sides. I'm with you. I feel it.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first show you this, and then we're going to get into demos. This is what I call the troubleshooting, okay, the points of interest, if you will, the POI. All right, when you look at Azure, there's certain things that you have to understand about Azure. In order to make connectivity to Azure, you have to have something like a VPN or an express route. Okay, so if anybody doesn't know what an express route is, it's actually a redundant, dedicated connection to Azure. Okay, a site-to-site VPN, obviously, everybody should know what that is. But you need that connectivity. I can tell you in probably 60% of the issues that I have people asking me about is all about how to connect to Azure and the latency of connecting to Azure, the slowness of accessing their application or their remote desktops or whatever have you. It all has to do with that connection between the two. And you're really looking at a couple of things. You're looking at the size of the connection. You're looking at what else you're running over that connection. If you're running a VPN, it's not the only thing you're running, okay? So the VPN's only getting a chunk of the pipe, but also you're dealing with the laws of physics, all right? You simply can't go faster than X, It's you can't go 10 times the speed of light. It's just not possible. Okay, so
Yet.
you're not talking about, yeah. I mean, you're not talking about something that is like inside of your data center that's like a floor below you, or right next to you, or what have you. It's halfway across the country. Okay, so, and we're not just talking SaaS. We're talking infrastructure as well. So the next thing is we're talking about is the actual tenant. You have a tenant account. These are all troubleshooting POIs. These are things that you should be looking at if you're trying to troubleshoot something that's going on in Azure. You look at the tenant, you look at the account, you look at what limitations the account may have on spending or actual permissions and things like that. Then you start getting into the actual subscription. The subscription is actually different. The subscription can be, you can have 100 subscriptions inside of one tenant, or you can have one subscription to one tenant, like a pay-as-you-go. Okay, then you start looking at the directory. You have to have a directory inside of Azure. Okay, and it's not necessarily an Azure Active Directory. It has to be it could be a control directory. It could be, and by a control directory, I mean it could be XYZ at onmicrosoft.com. If you have a directory that's on Microsoft.com, that is called a control directory. And what that is that's the way to actually, it's kind of like a back door into your account. Okay, you can always access that directory underneath any other directories that you put on top of it, like xyzcorp.com. Okay, and then you have the resource groups and the managed resource groups. So your resource groups, the RGs, is where you have all of your things put together in logical units, right? Now, when you look at managed resource groups, those are managed by Azure, and you're just paying for what Azure says you're using. Okay, so you really can't see what that, what some of those things are doing. You're just paying Azure, to use those, like managed disks. So you can switch to managed disks. Managed disks are actually put into somewhere else inside of Azure, okay, not inside of your resource group, so you're not directly responsible for them. Azure takes care of those disks, but you're just paying on consumption of the disk. Okay, so the old adage people would ask is like, where's my data? When I go to the cloud, where's my data? Well, it's gotten even cloudier, excuse the pun, because with managed services, you really don't know where your data is. Okay, I mean, it could be spread across multiple data centers, multiple regions, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're going to get into tool sets a little bit. These are the IBTs, the inbox tools. We'll talk a little bit about that. Anybody, either of you tell me what an example of an IBT?
I cannot.
Nor can I.
You can. You could.
Inbox tools.
Yep. How about one that starts with perf and ends with mon?
Oh, come on.
Or
that's what an inbox tool.
Yeah, they call it in Microsoft. They call it IBT.
Okay.
So yeah, so an inbox tool is like your event viewer.
Sure.
Any of those tools that you use, your perfmon, all those administrative tools, even control panels, considered an IBT. Then you have something called ICTs. Those are in-cloud tools. Those are the ones that are in Azure or in a cloud somewhere outside of an actual server operating system or a desktop operating system.
Gotcha.
And then we have the hybrid tools, the ones that work in between. And then lastly, external tools. Microsoft has some external tools like SCCM. Okay, so you can have on-site SCCM to help you troubleshoot things that are happening up in Azure. Okay, and then they also have now, it's kind of classified as a hybrid, could be an external, is the server admin. Okay, the Windows Server Admin tool. They have external tools, could be some open source like Grafana. It could be something, that is a tool that you already have, like SolarWinds or whatever, I don't know. But those are all tools that can do things on premises or in their own cloud that can talk to Azure or talk to AWS or talk to Google Cloud or talk wherever. Okay. So I'm going to show you Grafana actually in a little bit. All right, that's it. We're going to go to demos.
Woohoo.
Enough slides for now. Okay. All right. So here we go.
Now, for the viewing audience, this is a live demo, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Live demos never go wrong on vBrownBag. I'm sorry.
I hope not.
I'm tempting fate.
Yeah. So you just jinxed me. So I appreciate that. No, really, I do.
It's actually an anti-jinx. Whenever I don't say that, then everything goes south. You can ask Cody. You can ask Cody Diarklin about that. When I say that, when I taunt the demo gods, then for some reason it works. So it's like a reverse jinx.
That's awesome. I hope it works, because what you see on my screen is actual on dashboard, right? So you log in. My dashboard might be a different color because you can customize the colors, right? So I like dark. I like dark rooms. I'm sitting here with like no light or anything. Anyways, kind of like a knock. But you'll notice on my screen something called Service Help. And when you're troubleshooting in Azure, one of the first things you should look at is, hey, is it really something with my infrastructure or is it with Azure? And a perfect example of that is today, right? Because East Coast, Microsoft actually had 2 of their data centers on the East Coast under what they call the region East US 2 that had a fiber cut about 5 kilometers away from the data centers. And it was a construction fiber cut, and they cut clean through. And so they haven't had a disruption pretty much all day today. And one of the side effects is that it affects other services. And when a person when you have an account and a subscription in Azure, you can create infrastructure and services in different regions. So some of my stuff is actually running in the Eastern region, and that means that stuff is affected, okay? But my stuff that's running on the West Coast is not affected, or my stuff that's running in Central is not affected, okay? So right now, I could take those things and I could move those, because you could move those to another region, but it's really, right now, that's really difficult to do. Number one, because of the latency that's involved in the actual move. If you're talking about big, disks and stuff like that, it's actually got to move across the wire. So you don't want to do that. But you'll also notice we have an outage for a VPN gateway. So I have a VPN gateway set up at my home that goes up to 365, okay, into Azure. Actually, it's Office 365 is Azure, but I have a VPN gateway, so they're having problems with that. So my gateway right now is dead, okay? It's intermittent connection, but that pretty much means you can't do much with it, right? So when you're actually in here, you can click on this and, it'll bring up the actual maintenance. Now, you'll notice that my portal is running really slow. And the reason for that is because of what's going on Azure. So hopefully we can get through this. Now, what you'll notice is when you look in here, you can look in here and it'll tell you what your potential impact is. Okay, so first it'll give you what the actual problem was, and then it'll tell you the impact. And then you can click on View Details, where it'll actually bring you to your resources that it thinks it's going to impact. Okay, so that's really kind of cool, because they're kind of predicting or giving you some kind of a heads up, saying, hey, these resources could be affected. You might want to, inform your users or do this, or have a backup plan, whatever. And you can go through both of these. But the one that actually isn't showing the service issue, because I updated this, I don't think I have a history on that. I'm going to show you actually another browser window. You can actually go to an actual status page for Azure, okay, which everyone can see. And if you refresh that, oh, now they say they fixed it. Okay, so the network error has been fixed. Awesome.
Yay.
Yay. Everything looks green. You can go down. You can always see in Azure if you're in a different region. I'm not sure where you are, or if you're with Azure Government, you can actually see the difference, and what your status is. But that's really kind of a cool thing to do, is be able to right off the bat see if anything affects you that may be affecting, Azure. And then you can also look at planned maintenance. If they actually have any planned maintenance outages they're gonna have, if they have any health advisories, okay, which health advisories are more like, hey, this NAP provider is having kind of a meltdown, you know, they lost a router and it could affect, you know, services to Azure, or, you know, something like that. So that's pretty much just looking at the Azure Health in general. The next thing I want to get to right off the bat is a couple of external tools. And the reason why I'm going to do the external tool is because these are things that you can really use to troubleshoot your network connectivity. That first POI that I talked about, the ability to troubleshoot, hey, my app is slow in Azure, so on and so forth. There's 3 tools that I always lean on, okay? One is called AzureSpeed.com. So if you go to AzureSpeed.com, it'll actually test out latency from different regions in Azure. Okay, and you can pick different, you know, Europe, Asia, but it can do other things too. It can do a content test. It can actually do a PS ping latency test, a download speed test. You know, there's a bunch of other things that it can do. And then it's got a bunch of, you know, regions, environments, stuff like that. But it's really kind of cool because it will run the test and it'll tell you what the latency is. Excuse me. And right now I'm just screaming right along according to this, which I find hard to believe, but oh, yeah, he turned the CDN test off. Look at that. Wow, bad guys, bad guys, bad guys. So this is one test that you can do. Excuse me for a second, I have to cough. Sorry about that. One of the things, yeah. One of the things you can use is also something called Cloud Harmony. Now, Cloud Harmony is something that's owned by Gartner, which, you know, yay, boo, yeah, whatever. Anyways, it's really a good tool that you can use because what you can do is you can do all kinds of network performance tests, networks tests. You can even look at service status for providers. So you can actually go through all these providers and see, well, Amazon EC2 and Northeast 2, wow, you're getting an outage. You had 2 outages for 7.5 minutes. Okay, you can see all this. Look at CenturyLink cloud servers, 100. Wow, a lot of outages. So you can go through and look at all this, and it monitors all that. Faction Cloud, GoGrid, these are all hybrid. And then you get into Google, and Azure's on here too, right? So you can get a really good server status, but then you can also filter on the different aspects: DNS, delivery, storage, and compute, right? So it'll actually tell you what the availability is for compute over 30 days. Okay, that's kind of cool stuff. I mean, that's good research stuff, but it's also good troubleshooting stuff. Here's where you go in and you actually can run a network test. Okay, so you can test an actual, you know, test to, if I say compute, and it's gonna want to do an Amazon. Let me do a Amazon test for 15 seconds. You know, it'll run through and it'll actually run the test and it'll give you latency numbers. Okay. Now, obviously, I should be doing this for Azure, but I don't want to take the time to hunt down the Azure one. But that's really a good tool. And then you have Azure Speed Test, which is also a really quick and easy tool that'll just give you the latency from the browser, from your browser now. This isn't from your switch or your network or anything like that. This is from your browser. And this is telling you what your millisecond latency is. You'll notice once we start going over the pond, okay, that's when we hit over 100, what is it, 120 is kind of like standard for heading over the pond. You'll notice that it breaks from going to, you know, west is 95 right now, 129 to France.
Cool.
But then you get down to Brazil and you're at, you know, 300. So if you have anybody that works like, you know, development, offshore development or offshore teams, this is a good place to look on actual latency of where they are located, which I've had to do a couple times is, you know, hey, I got some folks over in Dubai and we need to, you know, find out what their latency is right now. So those are some external tools that I wanted to show you, okay? I'm gonna get back to the internal tools here. Okay, so one of the first things you have to know about Azure is Azure has something you can, all these services that I have, these are my favorites, right? But you can go to all services, and if you go to all services, literally look at all this. I mean, you can travel for days looking through this stuff and trying to figure out what everything is. But if you actually have one that's called Troubleshooter, and I'm like, oh wow, you got one that's actually called Troubleshooter, that's probably pretty helpful, right? Well, not really, okay? Because Azure's version of Troubleshoot is actually troubleshooting user issues with Intune. Okay, so if you're dealing with a user issue that's attached to Intune, then yeah, that's awesome, okay? But if you're not, then not so much. Okay, so the biggest thing that you need to look at in Azure is something called Monitor, Azure Monitor. All right, so Azure Monitor is now going to be the central location for everything Azure monitoring, alerting, metrics, okay, and analytics. That's going to be the central point. Everything is being moved into there that is external right now, and this is going to be like the core is going to be monitoring. So when you're inside of Monitor, you can actually go in and you can do things like set up alerts, do metrics, look at the metrics that you want to, look at log analytics. That's kind of really important, and I'll show that in a second. Being able to see what's happening. You can look at your service health, which is what I showed you before, right? Then you start getting into actual solutions around Network Watcher. Network Watcher allows you to do like packet captures, okay? Wire data, being able to look at wire data, being able to look at flow, okay, from the network gateways and the load balancers that are inside of Azure. So you can actually capture network flow and put it into, a table or put it into a database and being able to, or even export it to a third-party tool, like Splunk or something like that. You can export all this data. The one thing that people don't realize about Azure, and this is true with a couple other cloud providers, I'm not going to say who is and who does and who doesn't do this, but pretty much every resource that you create inside of it is logging something. Okay, so there's something being logged about that resource. You create a VM, there's activity logs being created. There's basic logs about CPU, RAM, and things like that being logged. If you create a SQL database as a service, there are logs that are being collected about that. So there's always logs around every resource that you create. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here, you can go even further. You can go into Diagnostic Settings, action groups, you can auto scale, all kinds of cool stuff, right? One of the things is, okay, Azure recommendations, advisor recommendations. You can come out here and monitor, do advisor recommendations, and what this does is this scans your entire subscriptions, all your subscriptions, and it gives you recommendations about the health and things like that. Now, when you're troubleshooting, this is kind of cool because what it can do is it can tell you that there are some things that are impacted, like the security. Maybe something happens security-wise and you need to take a look at it. Okay, you can go in here and you can take a look at it, all right, and see what those resources are. You could also, from a security, go right into log analytics. Now, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with OMS, okay, the OMS, the Operations Management Suite from Microsoft, but OMS is actually an external thing now that's being brought into Monitor. And OMS is like this huge data repository of all these, metrics and graphs and charts and tables, and it's just, a collection of data. But you have the ability now to bring that all into Monitor, into Azure. So I can take a look and just, run a query against all the logs and everything, and I can pick up all this stuff about, everything that I'm running in my environment. These are my machines, my compute machines. Okay, this is telling me about this compute machine, and the heartbeats. Okay, all that kind of stuff. Now, I will tell you, this is something that you need to take time and understand, because it's not like you can just go ahead and run this thing. I mean, Microsoft would lead you to believe that, but when you start getting to actual queries, when you start getting into here and actually, looking at queries and how they're done. This is done with actually something called the Cusco language, which is something created by Microsoft. But it's not for the faint at heart when you're talking about an administrator that's really never done, SQL queries or anything against a security database or anything like that. Okay, and when you get into advanced analytics, that's when it actually brings you out to the OMS portal. Now, some folks will actually, look at this analytics portal and say, oh, I remember this portal. Yeah, this is the actual, part of Ops Manager. You can actually go in and you can look at change tracking, take a look at what actually changed. This is kind of important in troubleshooting. This can tell you things that happen, to every one of your resources. If somebody changed something inside of your resource, if somebody went in and Ops Manager did an update, but if I went in and looked at computers, so I do a computers, well, I don't have a computer to search against, but let's see if I have, yeah, I don't have a computer to search against. But you'd be able to actually go in and take a look at what changes were done on that computer. I think I can bring that up on OMS though. I think I'll try that. Oh, that's the analytics. Go back to monitor. Let me take it with a pen. This is the actual metrics. These are the metrics that you can actually look at, so you can create charts and do all that kind of fun stuff, where you can, select a source, change your subscriptions. Whoops, I want to do that. Say I want to look at, boy, what do I want to look at? I'll look at that and say I have this machine. Okay, so it'll tell me what can I look at in this machine. I want to look at the guests. I want to look at the percent, I'm having problems with the disk. So I want to look at the percentage of disk time, and it'll lay that metric out for me. Now, I'm not going to be able to pull up any data on this machine, probably because I haven't run it for that long. But you get an idea. This is kind of like, for folks that don't remember, Perfmon, right? So if you think about Perfmon, you're kind of applying the same thought, the same train of thought to this. All right, so when you get into metrics, there we go. So data starts to show up about what this is doing. Okay, so I'm not trying to jump around, but it's really incumbent to understand that, again, everything is going to happen within this monitor screen. If you go into analytics and logs, into log search like we were in there before, again, going out and just checking for what the heartbeats for Windows machines, or count the number of distinct computers, okay, things like that. Being able to go into things like the diagnostic settings, where you can actually look at what your diagnostic settings are set at. And if we go down here, I think I have some in here. I've got a lot of stuff in here. Okay, so I actually have some machines in here. If you wanted to, this is a network security group, and these are public IP addresses. So I can go into a network security group like I have here, and I can enable diagnostics. Okay, and when I do enable it, turn on the diagnostics, it'll ask me, hey, do you want to archive it to a storage account? Do you want to stream it to an event hub, or just send it to log analytics? Okay, and then it's actually going to log all this information. So if you're trying to troubleshoot why a person can't get to a server, or why this application can't talk out this port, okay, this is a good place to start to look at, to actually, looking at the diagnostic settings and being able to collect that data. Kind of like looking at the firewall settings, or looking at the firewall event log and determining what's being blocked and what's not.
Very cool.
Now, one of the things I do want to show, I'll come back to this, but Microsoft just recently came out with something, and I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but it's something called Perf Insights. And if you haven't heard about Perf Insights, this is actually the tool that Microsoft created to help you troubleshoot VMs inside of Azure. Now, when you go into a VM inside of Azure, and I'm just going to pick one here. Where's the one I just made, the 2016 box? If you go into the VM in Azure, you obviously get these nice little graphs. You can say, hey, I'm really having a problem trying to understand what's going on with this box. For some reason, it's going up and down or something like that. I just don't know. You can actually go into monitoring. You can assign alerts to that box. Alerting goes to a central repository. You can have it email you, you can have it send you SMS, so on and so forth. You can take a look at the metrics, okay? You can look at the diagnostic settings. So if this machine actually has diagnostics turned on, you can take a look at the event logs if it's being collected. You can look at performance counters, you can crash dumps, you know, all those things you can look at. You can configure it all here and be able to troubleshoot this VM. Okay, you can even do boot diagnostics. So if you reboot the box, you know that when you're rebooting, obviously you can't see the machine boot in the cloud, but you can collect the boot diagnostics. Now that boot diagnostics will even go so far as to grab a recording of the machine that as it's booting. So it'll grab a screen recording of the machine as it's booting. Okay, so you can actually see if something is happening during the boot process that's causing a driver to be, you know, missed or something like that. It's you know, not so much helpful on the Windows side as much anymore, more on the Linux side, or if you're running things like server core, you know, it's more helpful. The full GUI though, obviously you get that nice little spinning Windows logo, and you know, you really don't see a boot process happening, right? But it does collect everything that's happening in the background. Okay. Another cool thing is you can diagram exactly what this machine is connecting to, you know, so you can actually see firsthand, hey, this machine has got this disk attached to it. It's connected to this virtual network, and it's more visual, right? You can actually see this, you know, from a visual point of view. Some people, you know, it helps them with troubleshooting rather than trying to figure it out. These are the actual agents that are installed on this box. I have several extensions, they're called, which I can show you real quick. That's kind of a key point too. When you build a box, you can actually add extensions. There's one called the Network Watcher extension. There's one called Performance Diagnostics. Okay, IS Diagnostics and Microsoft Monitoring Agent. Okay, these are all important extensions that you should add to a virtual machine if you want to, you know, they don't add a lot of overhead to the machine, but they really help you in troubleshooting. I'm kind of running through this a little bit quicker than I'd like to for the simple fact of time, but one of the last things I want to get to is when you get down to here, they actually created something called the serial console. So you can actually connect to a serial console of the VM, which is really kind of cool if you think about it. I mean, you can get to the back end, a back door of a VM by going through the serial port, virtual serial port that it as is. But I mean, you actually have ability, if you connect to the serial port, you actually have the ability to do things inside of there. You can reset the administrator password. You know, it's kind of like a backdoor little menu that you can do things to bring that machine back to life. Okay, it's really kind of cool. I do a full demo on it, but again, time. Now this brings me to the point of, I know there's a lot of VMware folks out there, so you guys are familiar with PowerCLI and PowerShell, right? So I hope everybody knows about the shell, where you can go to, you know, shell.azure.com and you can just open up a PowerShell directly to your subscription in Azure, and you can execute commands against it. If you don't know about that, I encourage you. This is actually a bash shell that you can run. So if you're running Linux, but if you want to switch over to PowerShell, you just click there and it'll actually start up a PowerShell session for you. And you can load modules in here. There's actual a storage account or a storage blob behind this. So you can load modules. You can, you know, do things like that. Obviously, you can't, you know, you can't bring the entire Power CLI into it. You'd be able to bring in portions of it, but you know, there's some DLLs and things I don't think you can do. So right here, I have a PowerShell prompt that I can, you know, go ahead and do whatever I want. It even gives you, you know, a cloud drive where you can save files if you need to. It's just a little drive you can use. So this is really kind of cool. also, I mean, it helps folks. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I do a lot of troubleshooting with PowerShell because it's much quicker, and especially when you're dealing with issues with the portal through the browser and the GUI. I like to do things, you know, command line. I mean, I was raised that way on the Linux platform, and it's just something I do. So if we have any other folks that like to do that, I encourage you to use this as your troubleshooting tool. Now, obviously, you can do that inside of the portal too, for those of you who don't know. I mean, here's a serial account closed already. But inside of here, you can click on this, and it actually brings up a shell window down here. So you can run it there as well. All right, so what I do want to show you is I want to show you the Perf Insights. Now, Perf Insights, when I showed you the extensions, if you install this extension, Azure Performance Diagnostics, this will install Perf Insights directly to the machine. Okay, you don't have to do anything. It automatically puts it on. You can also download Perf Insights as an installable, and I've done that here on this machine. Okay, so the reasoning behind Perf Insights is twofold. Number one, what it does is it collects all this information about a machine as it's running, and it collects everything, logs, it collects SQL information, whatever a lot of information that you're running on the machine, and you can even expand past that. You can actually add your own things to collect, and it's just a JSON configuration file, but you can add your own things. Now, the second part of it is really used from Microsoft support, because Microsoft support, from an Azure perspective, if you have a ticket open with them, or you say something's going on with my machine, they'll actually tell you to install this extension and run this for them, and then they'll take the logs and diagnose the issue off of that. Okay, so I have this 2016 machine, and what I do is I have something, I don't know if anybody's ever used this, it's something called Heavy Load. What it does is it just basically generates load. It'll generate file load, memory load, CPU, whatever you want. And Perf Insights is gonna actually record that load, and I'm gonna be able to look at it, right? So I'm gonna set this is set to run for 2 minutes. And I'm gonna start this up, and then I'm gonna start Perf Insights. First, I'm gonna show you what Perf Insights from a command line perspective. Okay, if you just run Perf Insights, okay, it'll tell you what the command sequence is. It's not a GUI, all right? There's no GUI to it, it's a command sequence. And you can, you know, look at the doc page on Microsoft and it'll tell you what to run here, but it is a CLI command. So I run it, and I'm gonna run it like this. I'm gonna run it for what they call VM slow, which is basically collecting a lot of data for 120 seconds, which is 2 minutes. And then this last long one is accept disclaimer and shared diagnostics, blah, 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 all the legal stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna start this first. This is gonna generate load on CPU, disk, and network, and also, yeah, CPU, disk, and network is what it's gonna run load on. So I start that, it's running load, and then I start the Perf Insights. Now this is going to run for 2 minutes, so we'll let it go here. And I'll show you one that I ran earlier that did the same thing. So it does what's called a collected data. It creates a zip file. You go inside of that zip file, okay, and there's Perf Insights report. You open that up in a browser. And if I can make this bigger, this will actually tell me, and I want to probably stop that because it'll dog this thing. It'll tell me that I had high CPU usage, okay? It'll tell me what I ran to collect it, and then it'll give me machine information. Now you're like, oh yeah, well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? But if you go into CPU, okay, it'll actually tell you what was actually consuming the CPU, at what point it was consumed. You can zoom in, zoom out, and get all the data on actually what was used.
Nice.
And how much time, right? So the speculation control is you're basically setting up the parameters for it. Memory we didn't test against. Storage we did. So it gives you a simple disk map, right? It gives you reliability counters, okay? But I didn't test long enough for that. It'll tell you the top disk consumers. Hey, what's eating all the disk? and then actually, what's using the IOPS. When did the actual IOPS show up, and what's consuming that? So from a troubleshooting standpoint, this is really kind of a cool tool that you can use for your machine, because it'll tell you a lot if you're an administrator. But if you'd rather hand this over to Microsoft support, or they tell you to use it, you're basically just uploading that zip file to them.
And Mike, we did have one question come across.
Yeah.
Were you going to get that one, Chris?
No, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was just basically wondering if Perf Insights it runs on Azure only, or can it run on your own quote unquote real Windows?
Yeah, it will run on your real Windows, but it'll. The last time I wrote it, when I ran it, it complained a lot because it actually goes out and looks for resources on the Azure from the Azure perspective through the extension agent. And I think you can. I think that Microsoft is realizing, hey, this is something we can run both on-prem and in the cloud. So yes, I believe you can. It's a real simple. Google, Perf Insights download. It's a real simple executable. Download it, run it on a local machine, and see what happens.
I've actually already downloaded it, and I'm running it against heavy load right now.
There you go. There you go. Awesome.
Two new tools. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. All right. So I don't have a lot of time left. The last thing I do want to show is something. If anybody does any work with Grafana, I don't know if anybody does. I highly encourage you to look at it if you don't already. So Grafana is basically a virtual appliance that you can set up inside of Azure, or you can set it up as a physical server. It's basically a presentation tool. It uses a bunch of other tools to ingest data and things like that. But you can just go into the marketplace in Azure and install the Grafana appliance. And when you do that, you have the ability to add something called, from a data source, you have the ability to add something called the Azure Monitor. Okay, and the Azure Monitor is actually a plugin that allows you to monitor things inside of Azure. Now, for those of you that have worked with Grafana before, or worked with similar ones like Prometheus or Zabbix or Xenos or anything like that, Nagios, whatever have you, that you work with those before, that you have to go the process of creating the data source, and then you have to create your dashboards and create your alerts and things like that. But if you already have this established, okay, this is awesome. You can just bring in the Azure plugin and then add it to everything else that you're already monitoring, right? And this is with any tool really, but I do it with Grafana. So in Grafana, I have a dashboard made. So basically it's just a demo, and this is just picking up percentage of CPU. If you know how to do this, you basically just go ahead and add. I can go in here and I can add a heat map. And if I go into the heat map, I click on edit. It'll ask me for the data source. I tell it I want my Azure Monitor. It'll bring up everything, all the resource groups I have in Azure Monitor. I can select the namespace, which I say, okay, I want to look at virtual machines. I want to look at that virtual machine, and the metric I actually want to look at is like, I don't know, disk in, disk right, whatever, and it'll show me a heat map of that. Okay, and these obviously can get very, these dashboards and your alerting and stuff can get, pretty intensive. If you look at the test data that they have, you can create all kinds of really cool graphs and charts and all that kind of funky stuff. And I got to tell you, from my experience, I created Grafana knock screens. The network operations folks, they love this stuff. They just love being able to, in their dark rooms, being able to look up at pretty colored graphs and stuff like this, and being able to see what's going on. But I do notice I've only got 5 minutes left. I don't want to hog up any more time. If anybody's got any more questions, I would love to show you more. And hopefully someday I'll be able to. But do we have any other questions?
That's the problem with somebody saying, please show us all the cloud services in 45 minutes or less, please. It's impossible. A quick question on Grafana is that installed in Azure and then runs as an appliance there?
Sure. What I'll show you actually real quick if you go in and actually create a resource,
Hmm.
if you type in Grafana here, okay, Grafana comes up. You can actually install Grafana Labs, and it's the actual virtual appliance.
Nice.
And you can even install it as a container image if you guys work with, if you work with containers. You just install this, and then you have a Grafana instance that gives you a URL to connect to, and you're up and running.
Is that multi-cloud or is that Azure specific?
This is Azure specific.
No. I mean the Grafana offering.
So I guess you mean ingesting data or just the appliance offering?
So I guess let me peel this back a second and get clarity on the question. So this is from the marketplace in Azure. So is this developed by a third party or is this developed by Microsoft for Azure?
No, this Grafana appliance is created by Grafana Labs.
Okay.
So the folks that created Grafana, the only thing that Microsoft created was the Azure Monitor plugin for Grafana.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you need to add the Azure Monitor plugin once you get Grafana up and running, which is basically a couple clicks. That's all you have to do. And then once you have Grafana running up in Azure, you can ingest data from anywhere, on premises, in the cloud, another cloud, wherever you want. It's basically another, just another place to ingest all of your logging data and statistics.
Very cool. Cool. I think that answers the question. And the last question on Grafana is it is open source, isn't it? And the answer to that is yes. Yeah.
Yes, it is. If I go here and create, some people will get freaked out because it'll come up and say buy. Okay, well, it won't let me show it because you got to fill all this out first. But when you click on, when it comes up and it says you need to agree to purchase this, all you're agreeing to is you're purchasing the consumption that Grafana uses. You're not paying for Grafana itself. You're paying for the consumption, this back-end storage, because it's storing all this data and it's doing all this stuff. You're just agreeing to pay for that. That happens to a lot because a lot of folks will freak out at that and say, yeah, I don't want to pay for this. Well, you're really only paying for the consumption.
Makes sense.
One last thing, if I could really quickly, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Ken, do you see any other ones?
I do not, and I think the reason is our audience is awestruck and they're just taking in all the new information given them tonight, Mike. As like me, they're taking notes furiously.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, there's been comments like "come back, please," and this was awesome. Yeah. So yeah, definitely.
So just to let you guys know, I mean, if you ever want to deploy something in Azure, this is really simple. You ever go out and you just do a Google search for quick start templates, and literally there are hundreds of templates where I can actually go through and set out a VM multiple IP config. If I click on that, I can actually just click here, deploy to Azure, and it'll deploy it. Okay, this is kind of important. I'm going to make this real quick point here. This is kind of important when you get down to dealing with managed services in Azure. Okay, because managed services, it's really difficult to monitor some of the managed services. So they actually have services. Okay, some of these quick start templates that will allow you to do it. So what it does is you deploy this managed disk performance meter, deploy it to Azure, and it'll actually give you a performance reading of the managed disk, which you have no control over, which is in Azure. But it's just a VM you spin up. It measures the managed disk performance. It gives you output, and then you can destroy it. Okay, that's basically what it says.
Very cool.
So I encourage everyone to go out and check those out as well. But yeah, if there's anything else, please, let me know. You can reach me at Nell Media. You can reach me at mike@geektweakers.com. There's no real website at Geek Tweakers. There's a specific reason why there's no website there, but you can always reach me at that. And I can't tell you how much I really appreciate you guys helping me out and for having me on. It's been a blast.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks and definitely come back if you want to again. And thanks everybody for tuning in tonight.